Amen. Good morning, y'all. My name's Will. I'm one of the pastors here. We're glad you're with us this morning as we worship together. A couple shout outs. I want to give a shout out to our youth director, Dawson, who got married yesterday. And so we celebrate with Dawson and Crystal. We fired Dawson for getting married on a football Saturday, so that's sad. But then we hired him back immediately, so that's good news. We want to lift up Dawson and Crystal. Also, Kelly. Kelly's actually in the room when I said this time. Kelly Acuff back there. Kelly did the ceremony. It was Kelly's first wedding yesterday. And so we celebrate with Kelly. Did a beautiful job. It was just a great time for us to celebrate together as our team, as the Powell Church team. We're walking through a series called Fruitful. This is a series on vision and generosity, about what's next for our lives and what's next for our church. A couple housekeeping things on that. We've been working with Palmer Cantler, who's doing a great job as our consultant. She's been going around to small groups, and we've had an online survey where you can tell us about things you love about this place, things you'd like to see done differently, visions for the future, that sort of stuff. These listening sessions and the online survey that we have will close a week from today. So Palmer is in Susie Peterson's small group on Wednesday night. She's in the fellowship Sunday school class next Sunday morning. And then we still have one open listening session. If Palmer hasn't gone around to your small group or you haven't been able to come to one of these listening sessions, we would love your input. You can still sign up for that listening session. It takes place during this worship service in a room to be determined later next Sunday morning. Also, you can take the survey online, but all of that will close a week from today. So after next Sunday, we're excited to tell you, here's what we've been hearing from you about vision and next steps and that sort of stuff. So if you want input into that process, we would love that. That's our desire, is to hear from absolutely everyone on that. And so powellchurch.com, or go to guest services after this is over and you can sign up for that listening session next week. I would love to hear from you this morning on the question of, what is the first job you ever had? No matter how many years ago that may have been. I said this in the early service, there was a that went through the crowd. However many years ago that may have been, what is the first job you ever had? Eric's going to play some good house music for us. Take 2 or 3 minutes, turn to your neighbor. What is the first job you ever had? Ready? Go. I said this in the early, shout out to Huey Lewis and the News. This is my first concert at Stokely Athletic Center back in the day, Huey Lewis and the News. He cut it up. The next line in that song, which is from 1982, is $100 car note, 200 rent. So that song needs a slight update in 2024 for sure. I really enjoyed, this is true in the first service too, the number of people who said, I did this and I was terrible at it. I did this and I hated it. I did this and it showed me I never wanted to do that again. Wendy, I worked there for 4 weeks and 2 of them was working out a 2-week notice. And so I really like that. I really appreciate that. I think, so like the most common answer here is some sort of food service industry. You worked at a fast food restaurant, you were a waiter, waitress, hostess, or you worked at a grocery store. With a side of babysitting and lawn care. So that's kind of, these are the entry-level positions that are available to human beings in the United States of America. I feel like that's mostly still true, right? And I feel like there are good things that you can learn about yourself and about the workforce and all that kind of stuff by starting in one of those jobs. That was my first job was at Kroger on North Shore Drive. I was 16. It was the summer between my junior and senior year of high school. Minimum wage at the time was $5.15, but I made $5.20 an hour because I was a cashier instead of a bag boy. And I was like, I need that extra nickel. I need that extra nickel an hour. That too is a dinosaur element of like the idea that they're going to hire a cashier position and then a bag boy or bag girl position. Those are we're all doing those jobs right now when we check out at the register and all that good stuff. But I remember my first paycheck was like $150. It was like $138.97, after stuff comes out and you're like, why is it less than it should be, and that sort of stuff. But I remember being handed that paycheck at 16 and feeling like, I'm rich. $138, it's all for me. They're going to give me $138 again 2 weeks from now? Like, well, I've made it. Like, this is it. And then it doesn't take long to figure out, like, no, like, I'm gonna need a little more. Then I worked at a Christian bookstore in Westtown Mall when I was at college. The Christian bookstore's not there anymore. I've told this story before. The Christian bookstore was between two stores that are still there in Westtown Mall, which is the Great American Cookie Company and Annie Ann's Pretzels. So it smelled like the promised land in the Christian bookstore. And there, I think I made $7 an hour there, and I was working more, and my first paycheck there was $300. And I remember thinking, like, okay, now. And also, I hope you got to work a job in your life when you're like 18 or 19 and you get a job and you're like, I'll do this for the rest of my life. It was so cool to work at the mall, at Westtown Mall in like 2000 when you were 18 or 19 and all that stuff. And I remember being handed that and feeling like, well, now I've made it. At which point my parents stepped in and were like, let's talk about your car insurance, and these kinds of things. And then soon you figure out like, oh, okay, no, like this, maybe not this. Then I worked for the Department of Conferences at the University of Tennessee. So when UT did an event, they used college student grunt labor to cover, all these random duties of pulling off this event. During an event, 1 week, I literally clocked 100 hours during this. So you would get this huge check with all this overtime, and then they would give you the next 3 or 4 days off, but you were still 20 and dumb. So I'd go play, 72 holes of golf and go out with my buddies, and then I'd be like, we need another conference because I'm out of money. So you just kind of bounce. Maybe you've had this experience too. I was a part-time youth director. My first job as a pastor in a very remote place called Ceres, Virginia, that I talk about often and is dear to my heart. I made the minimum amount you could make to be a full-time pastor. It was $23,000 in 2006. And there was no gas in the community. So you had to have enough gas to drive 14 miles into the valley and 14 miles back out to get gas the next time. And that place, I was like, okay, like this is cutting it a little close. Maybe you've had a similar experience. And as we're talking through this series about generosity and vision and fruitfulness and all these kinds of things, something we talked about last week is that it's true that Jesus in the Bible talks about money or things or wealth more than he talks about anything else other than the kingdom of God. But sometimes what happens to me, maybe it happens to you too, is sometimes I read passages where Jesus is talking about someone who's rich, and I say, well, I'm not rich, so this is not me. And as we shared last week, I think one of the most dangerous things we can do with Scripture is say, that story doesn't apply to me. Or one of the worst things we can do, especially with Jesus, is to believe that he's not talking to us. So last week we looked at what is Jesus' most thorough teaching on money and talked about that Jesus actually doesn't use the word money in this teaching. He uses the word treasure, and he uses the word mammon to talk about wealth, stuff, the idea of more. And Jesus says that we need to, where your treasure is, your heart will be also. That it is impossible for human beings to separate their treasure from their heart. And so he instructs us to store up treasure, not in places that will rust or where moths will come in and consume and destroy, but store up treasure for ourselves in heaven. And that if we seek first the kingdom of God, that all these things will be taken care of. So we asked ourselves last week, what do we treasure? Not just what do you like, but what do you treasure? And how do we view those things, as Jesus talks about, through an eternal kind of perspective? How do we make sure that treasure exists for us and we live with it in such a way that it can truly last? Now, that story is in Matthew. I want to look at the same story this morning in Luke and look at the way that Jesus tags it with a parable. When Jesus in Luke talks about storing up treasure in heaven and where your treasure is, your heart will be also, he tells a parable in Luke that doesn't appear in Matthew. Here's that story. This is in Luke 12, starting in verse 15. Excuse me. I'm almost well. I appreciate everyone who's asked me if I'm well. I'm almost well. Jesus said to them, "Take care!" Exclamation point. "Be on your guard against all kinds of greed, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions." And then Jesus told them a parable. The land of a rich man produced abundantly. See, right away for me, I can be like, this is a rich guy. I'm not rich, so like this story isn't for me. But let's see if we can find ourselves in it anyway. So the land of a rich man produced abundantly, and the rich man thought to himself, "What do I do? I have no place to store my crops." He said, "Here's what I'll do. I'll pull down my barns, and I'll build larger ones. And there I will store all my grain and all my goods. And I'll say to my soul," soul, which is a weird thing to say to yourself, and probably a sign that things aren't going to go well for this character in this story. "Soul," capital S, "you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, and be merry." But God said to him, "You fool," which if you know is one of the worst things you can be called in the Bible, probably with an exclamation point, it is the worst thing you can be called in a Bible. And probably when God is saying it to you, it is the very worst thing you can be called. God said to him, "You fool," exclamation point, "this very night your life is being demanded of you. And the things you've prepared, whose now will they be? So it is with those who store up treasures for themselves, but are not rich toward God." So Jesus tells many parables. It's his favorite storytelling, his favorite teaching mechanism. And this is the only parable he tells where the consequence of the choices in the parable is death. And it's not a parable about, murder or robbery or any of kind of the very worst things that we would consider a human being to do. It's a story about this man who is rich, who then gets additional abundance and isn't sure what to do with it, and instead makes the choices that we see him make appear in this story. Now, as we shared last week, when Jesus talks about wealth, it can be easy for us to say, well, I'm not wealthy, and picture Scrooge McDuck diving in his gold vault of coins and all that stuff. And we could say, well, I don't have a vault, I don't have gold coins, this must not be for me. But I think with wealth, and here with the idea of being rich, what happens to us, or at least, man, what happens to me, is the things we think about what we have and what we need, even when we're just being handed $138.97 every 2 weeks, or $300 every 2 weeks, or minimum wage, or whatever the case may be. The things we think and the way we kind of posture ourselves toward that at the beginning, if we're not careful, can kind of become the ways we always think about our resources, even when our resources become more abundant. That it's not in the nature of what bad people do, it's in the nature of what people do. As we shared last week, mammon is not somebody else's problem. It is a human problem to say, I need more. And not so I can swim in gold coins, but to believe that what we have, what I have, is not enough, and to make us clutch tightly and hold on to what we have and be wide-eyed and nervous and anxious and say, I've got to have more, I've got to have more. Back in the spring, we read through the Gospel of Luke together as a church, and we used a commentary by Alan Culpepper quite a bit. Alan Culpepper on this passage points out something. We've got a slide that's got 3 of the verses together on it. Here's verses 17, 18, and 19 of what we just read. Alan Culpepper points out it's always a good practice to do with the Bible to say, what do the writers want you to know the most? Well, what word are they using the most? What words appear most often in this passage? And the answer is I and my. Consider the posture of this guy. I have no place to store my crops. I'll pull down my barns and build larger ones, and there I'll store my grain, my goods, and then eventually it leads to my soul. And what I would submit to you is that whatever your level of abundance or lack thereof, whatever your paycheck, whatever your debts, whatever mine, whatever the case may be, the real issue here is this question of whose stuff is this really? Who owns things? Let me point out as well, this parable is not anti-barns. The Bible, especially in a more agricultural society, many of you talked about working on a farm as your first job, that sort of thing, especially in a more agricultural society. Scripture is not anti-barns. The problem here is not that this guy has barns. I've got a savings account and a pension. I bet many of you do too. Like the barns are not sinful. The problem here is that when this guy has abundance, he views all of those things through the lens of and then chooses with that abundance to tear down his barns and build bigger ones. So essentially in this parable, the problem is not barns, it's the need to build bigger barns. And the rubber meets the road there, of course, to say, well, when do I know my barns are too big? And I can't answer that question for absolutely everyone in the room. We try to answer it well for ourselves. But the real rubber meets the road here is this question of whose stuff is this? When we walk through something like this, we use the word stewardship quite a bit. And stewardship often in church world it's a word you expect to hear when we talk about generosity and all those kinds of things. But stewardship at its heart is far bigger than just money. Because stewardship is this idea that I have been given a thing. And I don't own it. It's not mine. But I've been given it to take care of, to take good care of. It's human nature in us to say, well, though, like this is mine and I worked hard for it and I'm good at it and I deserve it and all of that kind of stuff. So let me say, like stewardship, the idea that we've been given a thing, we've been given it to take good care of it. It not just leaves room for, but it asks of us, yeah, you better work hard. Yes, take good care of what we've been given. But at its heart, it's this idea of the things we have, are they ours or have we been given them as a gift? When we talked about sexuality last year, we used this same word to say that we believe that sexuality is a good gift from God for all persons. And we are called to be good stewards of this sacred gift. My time is a gift. Am I taking good care of it? My family, my kids, my relationships, are these things ours? Or have we been given them as a gift and entrusted from Genesis 1 all the way to today, entrusted to be fruitful and take good care of them? Back when I was working in the Christian bookstore between the cookie company and the pretzel place, there was a book that came out called The Purpose-Driven Life. Y'all remember that book? Rick Warren wrote this book. In books that have been released in the 21st century, only Harry Potter and the Da Vinci Code, which is a separate sermon on a different Sunday, have sold more copies than The Purpose-Driven Life. It was a wildly successful book. If you read it, does anyone remember what the first line of The Purpose-Driven Life is? It's not about me. It's exactly right. I love this book for the audacity it has to tell the truth. Like it sold so many copies, and yet it was very upfront, day one, line one, chapter one, to say, it's not about you. It's not about me. The only way something that is so audaciously against our own nature sells so well, I think, is if it's true. This, too, is Garden of Eden stuff to say, is my life about me? Is it about my desires, my wants? Or is there something bigger going on? And Jesus, throughout, would invite us that the goal is not to have the most stuff. The goal is fruitfulness. And we are, I believe, so much more fruitful. And I can't back this up scientifically, but I think just happier, by the way. when we live with a belief that everything we have is a gift. Everything. And yeah, we work hard, because of course we do. We've been given this good thing to take care of. But our resources, our time, our kids, our relationships, our sexuality, our free time, our everything is a gift. And we're called to be good stewards of not just our money, but the whole thing. So one of the places we, I think, learn that best and live that best is at this table, where we come, all of us, much like the ground at the foot of the cross, we come and find it level. Here's what we don't do, though it would be fun to try, but then the church would be closed the next week. Here's what we don't do is say, we're going to line you up in order of your giving, and the person who gives the most money can come first and take the biggest piece of bread. They can put their hands all over the rest of the loaf and all that other stuff. And then, if you don't give anything, or if it's your first time with us this morning, you can be in the back and get the crumbs that are left over. That's a terrible idea and not how this works. As we share often, this is one of the last places on earth where the ground is level. Where no matter who you are, no matter who you vote for, no matter who you love, no matter what you do, no matter any of those things, you come and get the same piece of bread. Here's the joke, unless you're gluten-free, and then you come right here, right? Right? Even then, we still make a way. Everybody is given the same thing. And as we share often as well, what we don't say too is, you know what, I'm good this week. I don't need grace this week. If so, you should be in the front of the line, right? Everyone is given the same, and what we are given is enough. It is not only equal, it is not only free, it is abundant. You cannot out-sin this. You cannot do it. God's grace is not like an ATM machine. I said that in the earlier service, and I had to make sure we all remember what ATM machines are, right? Sometimes, still to this day, I'm 42 years old. I've been doing this my whole life. Sometimes I still feel like I have sinned in such a way or such repetitive ways that I'm going to go to the ATM machine and God is going to say, I'm sorry, you are overdrawn and you owe me $35. It's not how it works. So not only is this the same and given to everyone and free, it is abundant. And you don't need a larger piece of bread than anyone else because you have been given the same grace, the same Jesus, the same everything. And I think that call helps us, or at least it helps me, to view my resources in the same way, because we got different paychecks, we got different debts, we got different things or whatever, but we've been given the same grace and been called to believe in this together as a gift. And so in just a moment, you'll be invited to come to receive that grace and receive that gift. And our hope, my hope for me, is that it encourages us to go from this place remembering that, yeah, we work hard and we do these things and we've done a good job and all this, but man, everything is a gift. And life is better lived when we believe that, or maybe when we just remember it.